Haha, mic was on mute. I feel like I'm back at work on a Teams call. Good morning. My name's Rob. I am that developer dad. I've been doing software for, way too long. And I found myself between work. So, hey, let's share some stuff that I figured out. This week, we started a brand new project. I'm taking it from I have an idea, and we're working through the requirements gathering and the planning and all that stuff. And yesterday, at the very tail end of the stream, we actually managed to set up our dotNet solution with the projects that are going to hold the code that we add. So that's, I had a momentary celebration, and it's Wednesday, July 3rd, and I'm only just starting my third cup of programmer juice. So I'm not quite on the ball yet, but we're going to first review our components, and we're going to talk about their dependencies. And that's going to help us inform a rough order of building for these things. And when we get into it, we're going to be bouncing from one component to another and so on. But I hope to do it in a way that is logical and makes sense, so that we get a feel for what it takes to actually build out a vertical stack of functionality in our software. So I'm going to pull my monitor application off to my other screen. And as you can see, as I'm looking at the buttons over there, I lose eye contact, but I need to be able to see what I do. Let's switch over to the screen share. And hey, welcome, Reverend Barney. I see that I have a new follower here today, just a few seconds ago. All right, on our screen. After yesterday's stream, I added some more tasks to our project board. First, we need to document the dependencies between our components and how those dependencies are going to manifest in the code. Then, once we've set up our project references using that dependency thinking that we're about to do, we're going to design the public contracts for the dice engine component. Once we've done that, I want to create some tests. They may not do much yet, and they're all going to fail up front, but I want to write some tests that describe what we expect this component to do for us. And then if I get through all of that, and we may not even get into some of this stuff until the afternoon session, we're going to start implementing the dice bag component. Let's dig in. I'll open this issue. Well, first we got to pull it into in progress. And I'm just using this for accountability and to keep myself on track, because I do have a little bit of HD. I've got 80 of it. And if I don't use these tools, I'll get sidetracked and fall down rabbit holes and go off on tangents, and it's just not going to be any good for anybody, myself included. So in progress right now is we got to document those dependencies between our components and how those manifest in the code. And I think I left myself a trail of breadcrumbs. We're going to update our architecture markdown document. We're going to add the list of components, where each is going to be expressed in the solution. And we're going to add notes in the dependency portion of that document that describes which components depend on which others. Sounds good to me. I'm going to pull that over to my other screen real quick. I don't need my social media windows open. We'll pull the Finder, bring it over here, go to GM Tools, and open in VS Code. I used an automator action for that on the Mac. It's pretty handy. And I actually want to see split editor right, open preview to the side. Good. All right, we've got our static design. Underneath the static design, I want to add a component manifest. And we have in the client layer let's make that bold. We've got, I want to shrink that up a little bit. Make sure you guys can see what I'm seeing. Good. We've got our console client. Console client. Ah! Lol. Typing while people watch is always way, way harder. Console client, simple console app we'll use to exercise the components and build a very simple, quick, and dirty UI for this temporary thing. Next, we are going to add, oh, hello, 9 of 12. My wife has graciously offered to become a moderator for me. She's got years and years of experience streaming and podcasting and so on and so forth, and she's my resident expert and tells me all of the things I'm doing wrong, and I really appreciate the feedback when she gives it to me. I don't always take the advice, but I do value it. All right, so managers / game tools dot townsfolk manager. Quick and dritty. I'll fix that in a second. And yes, I'm kind of a stickler for spelling and typos when I see them, because in my experience, spelling and clarity and grammar in our code and our documentation is exceptionally important. Maybe not while we're building it. It may not add value for the business when we're first constructing a feature for them. Where the value comes in is in 6 months down the road when I am a completely different developer and I'm trying to maintain this code and it's full of spelling errors and crappy grammar and meaningless comments. I'm going to look at that code and I'm going to go, who wrote this? And sure enough, it was me. But it's actually going to erode my trust in the code base. So always be very, very careful in your when you're coding that you spell things correctly and you use appropriate grammar, and just be careful with how you express what the code is doing. It does matter eventually, I promise. So managers, game tools, townfolk manager defines and exposes the use cases that our application will facilitate. /engines/ let's make sure I've got the right name here. GameTools.DiceEngine. .dice engine. rolls dice, allows for result modifications. I did reiterate what I was building this morning earlier at the beginning. Allows for result modifications. I'll restate it in a minute. And different ways to make rolls / resource access and let's say game tools dot NPC access. This allows us to save and load NPCs that we've generated. And I just noticed I made a boo-boo yesterday when I was creating these things. This rule set access, that needs to go. We got to remove that because I named it wrong. And we're going to add a new project. It is going to be a class library resource access / game tools dot rule set access. And it's going to be created in the correct directory. Good. Boom. And let's get rid of that. That can go bye-bye. And let's get rid of that extra folder and that extra project in here. So we'll go into resource access and rule set access. We're just going to throw him in the trash. Goodbye. Because I don't want that up in my code repository. So resource access, game tools dot rule set access holds lists of things. No. Holds data that will be used to create NPCs in the D&D 5e rule. No. Defines common concepts for different rules in tabletop role-playing games. I don't want to hard code rule set access so that it's only D&D 5e SRD. Maybe someday I decide I want to play Pathfinder and I'll need different stats for NPCs in the Pathfinder game. Or let's say I want to maybe explore some World of Darkness role-playing or some other open source role-playing system or what have you. Those are all going to have different ways of expressing the concepts of building characters and giving them stats and how the different attributes of a character interact with each other to actually make an imaginary living, breathing being in our worlds. So by abstracting those high-level concepts into the idea of a rule set, and then we can implement those rule set concepts for concrete systems, it's going to give us much, much more flexibility if we decide we need it. And we may never, but I'm abstracting this now because I know how painful it would be to have to re-implement the entire application when I want to switch from playing D&D 5e to playing Pathfinder 2. Especially if I've written all of the other components against the 5e specific rules. This, of course, is a metaphor. Sometimes we hold data in Microsoft SQL Server. Other times we might use MongoDB or Oracle or DB2 or something like that. And if we write our application against those resources as if it will always be in SQL Server or Oracle or one of those other database types, then when the CTO says, hey, we're moving SQL Server from on-prem into the cloud and we got to make a bunch of changes because there are some incompatibilities, suddenly you got to go in and touch the rest of your application. And that's going to take months if you're lucky. So let's do this abstraction now. It's going to add a little bit of time between nothing to something, but doing this abstraction at this point is absolutely worth it because it will save us a ton of pain later on. All right, I think I have my components listed out. Now, I goofed. I listed these as if they're .NET projects and so on and so forth, and I put them totally in the wrong place in this document. They should go not where they are, but under the detailed designs. Here we go. Hello there. We have another first-time chatter and another new follower, and I apologize. I am not even going to attempt to pronounce your name. But welcome, and I hope I managed to explain some ideas and concepts that make sense and help you out. Feel free to pipe up in the chat. My wife is moderating for me, and if I miss a question or something, she'll yell at me, and I'll come up for air and answer whatever it is you might have, you might be curious about. All right, where was I? I was scolding myself for putting this technology-specific project names and so on and so forth up under the static design. In our consumption layer, we have our client. This, for now, is just a console application. Logic layer. Townsfolk manager. And yes, we named the project for the concept, or for the component concept. Townsfolk manager composes the capabilities and functions we'll add to the engines and resource access components to perform the different use cases we'll have when generating townsfolk. Yes, I'm on a Mac, Barney, and yes, this will work on PC. I'm writing this in C#, using the dotNet framework, and a couple of years ago, Microsoft was actually kind enough to make dotNet Core run on anything, Windows, Linux, and Macs. I should make those both bold and italic. Let's add some white space here. There we go. What is our dice engine? It's called the dice bag, and I misnamed that. But that's okay. I misnamed it on the diagram. I can fix that up later. Dice engine. Handles random number generation using a dice roll metaphor. It will accept arguments that describe how many, what kind, how many and what kind of dice, along with optional modifiers for the result and how those dice should be rolled. I will not be implementing THACO, Daniel. I'm sorry. And we have our NPC access component. And I misformed. Oh, what are you doing? NPC access. I dug out a wireless keyboard the other day because September was complaining about how when I was using my laptop keyboard, it sounded like my fingers were a machine gun in the stream, and I'm still getting used to the old wireless Mac keyboard again. All right, NPC access allows us to save and retrieve NPCs as we generate them. Enough said about that. And rule set access. Let's go home, make it bold and italics. And for folks that aren't super familiar with this type of markup that I'm using a markdown file. It's a technology that was developed some time ago that allows people to format text without using HTML, because sometimes we want to make a long comment on a blog post or what have you, and we want to put headers and bullets and italics and bold and so on. And if we try to do that with HTML code into a web form, it might blow up the database. So somebody invented Markdown, which allows us to do the same kind of formatting, and then there's a parser that lives in your browser that retrieves this Markdown and converts it into HTML when it's displayed out to the screen. So rule set access gives us access to various lists and game rules that we'll need when generating an NPC for our game. Save it. All right. So there, we've just described our different components, and then data layer, I should probably do a little bit of description there. Let's come back and grab this. paste, data layer, what did I name these? Rule set data and app data. Set data. Let's make that 2 words. For now, we're going to do this as a bunch of hard-coded C# classes. I don't want to use a SQL server or anything else like that because because that's too complicated for what I'm trying to demonstrate. And then we will have app data. I called it app data up here. Let's call it, yeah, app data sounds fine. App data. For this first version, we're just going to store the characters we generate in a folder as one file per character. Save. Let's add some visual separation here. Component manifest. Save it. Static design. We've got our detailed designs. That's all I'm doing here for now. As we add things to these components, I'm going to come back and add descriptions, and I'll probably refine the way this information is presented in my documentation as I go. Just because bullet points with file paths isn't super useful, but I wanted to get something in here right now. All right. Let's just add a table. Component dependencies. Whoops. Clients will depend on the townsfolk generator and only the townsfolk generator. Whoops, not the townsfolk generator. Townsfolk manager. And I'm going to put an asterisk on that. Folk manager depends on our dice engine, rule set access, and NPC access. Dice engine doesn't depend on anything. So we're just going to leave that blank. Whoops. Rule set access will depend on collection rule set definitions. Okay, it's not going to let us use generic. I wonder if it'll let me do this. Not if I don't type it right. Of rule set definitions. I like that. And finally, our NPC access has a dependency on a configured folder on the file system. All right. You can hear the typing. Okay. 9 of 12 says she feels like I grew up with mechanical keyboards, and yes, back in the 1900s, when I was first working with computers and learning how to program and stuff like that, all of the keyboards were mechanical and went clack, 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 and it was just this delicious tactile feeling under my fingers and the noise, and largely it's rose-colored glasses. It's wonderful for the person who's doing the typing. It's terrible for everybody, probably within a mile. Okay, as we're working through this, I realized that we have need for, or I almost fell in a trap I used to fall in. Let me back that statement up. We almost fell into a need for another project that defines these objects that we're going to be exchanging from one component to the next, to the next, to the next. And I've used that technique a lot in the past, and it can be useful to an extent, but it can also become handcuffs that keep you from being able to flex and modify the way certain things are expressed within different components and so on. Instead, we're going to be creating public contracts within each of these components that describe what that contract's particular, what that component's particular view of an object's concept is. And it's going to be the responsibility of whoever's calling into these components to translate from their local idiom into the idiom of the component that they're working with. That sounded really dense and thick and heavy, and I promise we will explain it better in an upcoming stream when we get to that part. So I'm going to save. I'm going to close this, and I just want to review what we've got here. So our client components, right now there's only one. It's just a console application. It depends only on our townsfolk manager. And I put an asterisk on that, and I didn't describe what I meant on our asterisk. Bear with me for just a second. Where are we? Here's architecture. I need to come in and edit this. Down here. The townsfolk manager will will at first be referenced directly from our client. If we add a web interface and decide to move the logic into its own discrete service, we'll need to put an API, a web API in front of it. For now, we'll keep things simple. There. And what did that do? It stuck it in the thing. I need that and an empty line. There we go. All right, good. I got my footnote on there. I like it. All right, we have got a number of changes. Oh, you dummy. I'm such a silly goose. All right, I don't need the markdown document. I just want to use the preview. We're going to use this dependency assessment to actually start connecting these projects together. So over here in our Solution Explorer, let's start with our console client. And we are going to add a project reference. And we're going to reference our townsfolk manager. And we can see here inside the dependencies graph that we now have access to gametools.townsfolk manager. That's great. Our townsfolk manager depends on, well, everything else. So let's go ahead and add a dependency. We're going to add a project reference to our dice engine. Not frameworks, projects. Here we go. And we'll add a reference to NPC access. And finally, we'll add a reference to rule set access. And there it is. Very good. Okay. Our dice engine, we don't have to add any references for that. And our rule set access, it's going to have a requirement on a collection of rule set definitions. When we get to this point, and that'll probably be later this week, we're going to have some fancy footwork to do. So let's just not worry about rule set access yet, because that's where we're going to get into some complicated dotNet magic. And finally, NPC access. We don't have anything to store yet. There's nothing that I have to reference to access the file system. I might run into some extra difficulties because I'm on a Mac, and the Mac operating system is incredibly strict about what has access to what files and where, and it requires permissions and all of that stuff. So that this might get a little hairy. I might have to stuff the NPC access into an actual folder that the solution owns. We'll see. That might require some research here. Dice Engine hasn't got any dependencies. Now, normally, when I'm starting off with a brand new component, I'll write a little console app that references the component that I'm writing, and I'll use that to test the API. I don't want to do that, because then I'll have to remember to remove the dependency and rebuild and all that stuff, and I'm not going to remember to do that, and I'm just going to have a messy dependency graph, and it's just a bad scene. We're going to do something a little different, a little bit different from what I usually do. We're going to use a different technique. Now, before I do this, let's get this thing built. I just want to make sure that it builds successfully and nothing explodes and all that stuff. And let's see. Terminal will be reused by tasks. Press any key to close it. And it looks like everything succeeded. Yep, good. Let's try. Oh, it's not going to let us run it. If we come over here, let's do run and debug. And it's going to ask me which one to do. It's going to be C#, and we're going to use the console client. And all it's going to tell us is hello world. But I just want to make sure that when we added all of those dependencies and all of that stuff, I didn't break anything. And here we go. Here's our hello world. Good stuff. We have... Let's consult our tracking stuff. Add notes to the dependency portion. We're good. We're good on that. Did we add? We didn't add. I'm just going to add this. Add what we did with the project references. Also added project references. Appropriate project references. Once the dependencies were documented. I don't want to save. What are you doing, Rob? Golly. No, stop. Comment. And this is GitHub issue number 11. Yes, it is. Let's pull this over here. And over here. And before we move on to our next task, described the components in our added descriptions for our components to the architecture document, described the dependencies between them, added, project references to the components in our dotNet solution. Project issue number 11. This resolves project issue number 11. There we go. Commit. And we'll push those changes up into the cloud. Okie dokie. Couldn't find. Oh, yeah, that's right. I nuked that remote branch yesterday. Ha! So feature solution setup. Can we publish it? I'm going to push it. See if it'll let me. All right. And we don't have any outstanding changes. Let's go to our repository. We just added that branch, solution setup. Let's go make sure all of the changes that we made are made. One commit ahead of, one commit behind main. Okay. We're going to have to do a merge before we do the pull request. That's okay. So I must have made a change in the main branch of this thing later in the day yesterday. So here's what we're going to do. We've just pushed all those changes up to the cloud, so we're not going to lose them. Pull and push commits from and to origin main. Good. We're going to pull all of the recent stuff down from the cloud version of the main, or the cloud copy of the main version of our work so far. So now my main version looks exactly like the version that's up in the cloud. Great. Now I want to take those changes and I want to merge those from main. What am I doing? I'm a goon. I am a silly face. Here we go. I got to switch to the branch that I was working on. Now I can do a merge from main and hope that I don't have any conflicts. It looks like I do not. I can push all of that stuff up. Yep, do it. Off you go. Very good. It says it's done. Let's bring my browser back up here. And we'll take a look over here. We'll go into the branches and make sure I'm not behind, but I am ahead. That's great. That means the feature solution setup branch has newer stuff than the main branch. When you're working with multiple people and you've got multiple changes going on, you're going to see these two numbers change a lot. And something you want to do is make sure that this behind whatever branch you're based on almost always says 0. Because if it doesn't and you try to copy your changes from your local working copy into the main version that everybody else works from, you're going to have a bad time. Let's go back to code. And it says solution setup had recent pushes 1 minute ago. Let's compare on pull request. Feature and solution setup. Documented the component descriptions and dependency graph in our architecture markdown. Set up the necessary excuse me, project references in the solution. All right, we're going to create a pull request. Here we go, checking for ability to merge automatically. We don't have any conflicts, which is good. I haven't set up any real rules on here because I am the only person that's authorized to make changes to this repository. I'm going to add a label, and it's going to say architecture, coding, documentation, and infrastructure work. Good. Project, we're going to assign this to the GM Tools MVP project. MVP stands for minimum viable product. Status is in progress. Milestones, I haven't set any of those up. Yeah. Merge the pull request. Yes, I really mean it. Oh, Barney, it's okay. This is all heavy-duty computer nerd stuff. I'm dealing with source code control and making sure that I can undo things appropriately when I make mistakes. All right, so pull request was merged successfully and closed. I want to come out to my issues. All right, and let's update our project. GM Tools MVP. Here's all the stuff in the done pile. Document the dependencies between components. This we can move over to the done pile. And we've got about 10 minutes left this morning, a little less than. let's bring this into the in progress. All right, we're still on solution setup. I need to flip back to main. And I want to pull down all of those changes that I just pushed into the main branch. So now I've got a fresh version that includes all of the work I just did so far this morning. And so that I can protect that main version, I'm going to create a new branch. We're going to create a new branch from main, and we're going to call it feature / define dice bag contracts. I'm going to close that terminal window. We don't need it. I do need to open the solution. We're going to come into engines, expand the project. And the very first thing I need to do is add a folder called contracts. And what we're going to put in this folder, we're going to add an interface called dice bag. Here we are. Let's talk about this concept of contracts. And this is more a verbal thing. All right, so this morning I want to do my recap and talk about what's coming next. This morning we added some documentation about what all of the components in our application are and what their general purpose is for each of them. We then determined which components depend on which others. And then we made those dependencies real by adding references from our console client to our townsfolk manager, from our townsfolk manager to our dice engine and our NPC access component and our rule set component. And then we wrapped up by adding a contracts namespace to our dice engine. Contracts are things like interfaces, object definitions, or classes that are going to be available to components that are outside of the dice engine component. These contracts define the behavior that the components that consume our dice engine can expect to have available to them when they use a dice bag. They define the things that our dice engine knows about. And because other components use these contracts, once we've defined them, we need to be very, very careful when we change them. So we need to make absolutely sure that when we design our dice bag or our dice bag interface and we set up the custom classes or define the objects that the dice bag knows about, we got to make sure that those are stable and we're not going to be changing them often throughout the development process. Because when we change a contract, we also have to amend the other side of the contract. We have to amend the consumers. Just like in legal mumbo jumbo, we have to have both parties agree to changes to the contract. And we're going to use that to protect the rest of our application when we want to make a change to how dice get rolled. And we're going to get into that this afternoon. It's 10:56. There's about 4 minutes left. It doesn't make sense for me to dive into anything brand new or anything like that just yet, because if I do, I'm going to keep at it straight through until 1 o'clock. So I'm going to have some stream life balance, and we're going to end the stream. I'm going to get something to eat. I'm going to hang out with Mrs. I'm going to get the video processed and pushed off to social medias and stuff like that. I will be back at 1 p.m. this afternoon, Eastern Time, and we'll start building our contracts. Until then, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and it's a long weekend.